There are probably some people listening, right, who they really do want to do good for the world. They really do care about that. But they just don't think that they're going to take one of these AI-focused jobs. Maybe they don't think that they're well suited to any kind of AI-related roles. Alternatively, it might just be that they feel like they're not in a good position to change their careers right now. What do you say to these people? Is there anything specific in the book for them?
In a way, it feels like my life's work. It's the last 15 years of thinking about this question at 80,000 hours, and I've tried to distill all of our most central and important ideas into this one nicely honed package.
Hey listeners, Zershaaneh here. If you enjoy what we do at 80,000 hours and you're interested in joining our team, then you should check out the Work With Us page on our website because 80,000 hours is growing. We're hiring for lots of roles, so I think there are 9 listed at the moment, and they're across several of our teams. Plus, if you like hearing our guest today, Ben Todd, who gives some advice on careers that do good, then you might be especially interested in the product manager role on our web team. In that role, you'd be helping our online advice about high-impact careers resonate with and reach more people. Okay, that's it from me. On with the show. Today, I'm speaking with Ben Todd. Ben is actually one of the co-founders of 80,000 Hours, and he's just published a book, also called 80,000 Hours, which is all about finding a career that does good. So it covers a bunch of advice, including what makes for a dream job, what skills are most likely to be automated soon, which problems are most important for people to be working on, how to network, and many, many other things. So today I want to talk to Ben about his wider views on AI that have shaped a lot of the book, as well as how people should actually be making career decisions in these quite uncertain times. Ben, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So the title of the book, 80,000 Hours, is a reference to the number of hours in an average career. Some people have joked that, hey, maybe the book should be called 8,000 Hours, just because the next few years could be so crucial. Can you walk us through what you think might actually happen in the next few years?
The concept of the book ultimately is your career is the most important decision you'll make, especially for your impact on the world. And if we're facing this crucial moment with AI, in a way, I actually think that's like even more important than ever to think about how are we going to use these years in the best way we can. So in terms of what's happening, I think a useful thing to try and forecast is when will we have AI that can do AI R&D itself.
Okay, and just to be clear, so the reason that it matters how quickly we get AI R&D automated is that when that starts happening, that introduces some feedback loops where AIs are designing better AIs, right? What would the world look like if that happened? Like, why should we care about that particular moment in the future?
There's actually like many powerful feedback loops in AI, but like the one that could be the most sudden is the algorithmic feedback loop, which is if you get to the point where an AI agent can do AI research itself, given the amount of computer chips we have in the world now, you could, like each company could run the equivalent of like maybe 10 million researchers, which would mean that effectively the AI research workforce would expand by like 1,000 times. And although they would still have a limited amount of computer chips, with that much more research capacity thrown at the problem, they should be able to speed up AI research a lot. And so Forethought, for example, have estimated that it's quite plausible you could see something like 5 years of AI progress in 1 year. Right now, AI is actually, it's still quite narrow in what it can do. It's like very good at multi-hour software engineering tasks, but it's still a long way from being able to do most jobs. And it still can't even like play Pokemon better than most children. But if you suddenly if we suddenly had another 5 years of like the last 5 years of progress in 1 year, you could get to a point where suddenly something much more general, much more like a true digital worker, you could say, started to work. And this would be like an AI that you could literally ask to do almost any job that can be done virtually.
Yeah, and the idea then is that once that happens, society changes very rapidly, right? You're deploying AIs in all sorts of different fields, progress in all sorts of fields goes crazy, things are moving faster than we can keep track of, and that throws up a bunch of risks.
Yeah, there'll be like these 100 million copies of Claude, which is like almost like the whole working population of the US, will be almost like this new, like a whole country's worth of people doing whatever those Claude things are doing at that point, and able to think very fast and also able to act very autonomously. So that's where you also start to get these like loss of control risks coming in, and the more dangerous scenarios. Like single companies might end up with a workforce that's bigger than the entire human workforce now, which could also like give those companies huge amounts of power, and starts all kinds of novel risks and things to think about.
Yeah, okay. So you now think that AI R&D could be automated pretty soon, basically. That's your feeling.
I don't know, but when I was in the Bay Area in February talking to people about this, I was pretty shocked to find many of the people who seem to have the best track records of forecasting AI to me were saying, well, it could be a 10% chance we reach this point this year. I wasn't really thinking, oh, it literally could be this year that an intelligence explosion would start. And then the chance of like a couple of years later is even greater still. So Jack Clark recently published a piece about arguing that there's a 60% chance that AI R&D is automated by the end of 2028.
Wow.
Which I think reflects the views of many people actually in the labs themselves doing this research, because
He's at Anthropic,
yeah,
right?
he's at Anthropic. But it's not just people at Anthropic. I've heard this from people at DeepMind as well and OpenAI, that they just really feel like these tools are really helping them and doing more and more independently and autonomously. And they can just kind of like see this process. They just draw the trend lines forward a few years, and it seems like it could be really speeding up our research.
I kind of want to dig into that a little bit, because I wonder how fair it is to be doing this kind of extrapolation.
Even if we just extrapolate revenue growth forward 3 years, it kind of like seems to imply we get something like AGI in 3 or 4 years' time from now. Anthropic's been growing their revenue 10 times per year for 3 years, which is already completely insane. But in the first quarter of this year, they actually grew at an annualized rate of 80 times. Even on a base of already $10 billion or so of revenue, which is probably the fastest a company of that size has ever grown, just due to the huge demand for these more agentic tools. There's like various memes about how dumb it is to just like do trend extrapolation, that like, oh, like my baby has grown this much in the first year, so like it's going to be like 10 foot tall in like 1 more year from now, which is like obviously isn't how things work. But then I think like just saying, oh yes, well it is an S-curve and it will plateau at some point, that is true, but it's not very helpful, because we don't know where it will plateau. And it might plateau at like, you know, vast super intelligence that's spreading out over the galaxy, which is not like very helpful.
Yeah. So my understanding is that a lot of this does rely on being able to increase the amount of compute that's going into these AI systems. And it seems like there are some reasons to believe that it's going to get much, much harder to throw more and more compute at these systems in the coming years. How does that affect your story here?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that as we produce more and more computing power, it becomes harder and harder, which wouldn't mean that progress would halt, but it would mean that it could slow down a bunch from here.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like there are a lot of moving parts here. There's a lot of things that are uncertain. There's a lot of debate over like the trends that you're describing, when things are going to begin slowing down, how capable our AI systems will be at the point at which things start slowing down. And I think it strikes me, just kind of moving this back to the book itself, that, you know, what people can do with their careers to make things go well really depends on whether they have 3 years or 30 years to act before things just start going crazy. So how do you write a book of career advice at a time like this? And how can you make the advice actually useful? Like, why do people think that it's useful?
I find it useful to think in terms of 3 key scenarios for what might happen. The first being that like basically the people at the frontier companies are right, and they are going to get like an automated AI researcher within a couple of years And then that could start an algorithmic feedback loop. And you're getting like more general purpose AGI, perhaps in like 2030 or even 2028, 2029. And then the next scenario is that like, well, okay, this is basically happening, but those people are being a bit over optimistic and they're not quite accounting for all of the bottlenecks that will happen. And then compute growth will slow down a little bit. And that could really push this automated AI researcher into the early 30s. So that's like a slightly slower, but still very crazy timeline. And then the third scenario is basically the current paradigm kind of runs out fairly soon. And then compute scaling becomes too expensive. And then you could have quite a long plateau, potentially several decades. That would be like the slowest scenario. So yeah, which of those we're in does have a big effect. The main ways it has an effect is the longer you have, the better it is to build career capital and to explore lots of options. Some people say in these short scenarios, these are the craziest, most dangerous scenarios. It's when AGI happens when the world is the least woken up. So we're the least prepared. And so those are much more impactful scenarios to work on. So you should just basically act as if we're in the short scenario and just do whatever would be best in that. And if we're not, well, you can figure out some other stuff to do in the medium scenario. You probably haven't burned too many bridges,
right?
Depending on exactly what you do.
Yeah, don't go too crazy.
And then there's a bit of a counterposition, which is that, I mean, especially imagine if you're a college student right now and you're like, well, I've just started college. If there's going to be AGI in 2029, like I might not have even graduated yet, or and so it's like hard for me to do anything. So for most people, they actually have more ability to help in these slightly more medium-term scenarios. And like that could be a big effect because say like the difference between being a fresh college graduate and then someone who's spent 10 years working their way up government and now is in like a really influential position, they have much more ability to help with things, maybe like 10 times, 100 times more. And so that could actually mean like, well, it's better to gamble on the medium-term scenario because you'll be in such a better position to help, that you'll actually have more impact by doing that, even though there's a chance that you're too late and you don't actually help in time. And if you kind of take the average of these two views, it implies that you should basically act as if like not that the short scenario is happening, but like one a little bit longer than that.
Right.
Because basically like your ability to help is curving up, but the leverage and neglectedness of AI is going down. And it's like where those two cross is like the optimal year for your impact.
Yeah, it's simple. So, you just got to do the math.
But it does more, like, a more practical level. I think most people shouldn't just think, well, it's like it's 3 years or nothing, and act as if like nothing beyond that matters. But I do think there is like an argument for having quite a bit of urgency, especially compared to 10 years ago when we thought timelines were much longer.
How should people work out where they should be kind of like what worlds they should be trying to be optimizing their efforts for? Like, how do you go about that thinking process?
Well, I mean, the biggest one is just which of these three scenarios, how likely you think each one is. Yeah. And then it would just be, do you think these short scenarios are much more neglected, so much higher leverage? And then how much could you increase your ability to help by, say, focusing more on career capital for a while? So in general, younger people, there's a good prior that they should focus on these slightly more medium-term scenarios. But if you're already established and it's like harder to increase your career capital as much, then you can focus a lot on just the short scenarios.
Right. So my understanding, right, is that the book itself takes a sort of all things considered view where it's like you kind of do the averaging out across the possibilities and then you try to provide people the most useful advice with all those things taken into consideration. And what you kind of come to is that at this sort of moment in history, it seems like the sort of top options you recommend people work on are just various challenges in AI. So in particular, I think you highlight the chance of loss of control of AI systems and kind of protecting ourselves against losing control of AI systems as they become more autonomous. And the other one being protecting against AI just extremely concentrating power into the hands of just a few people. But you do mention other problems that the world is facing that are also useful to be working on at this time, all things considered. Just kind of stepping back, like I could imagine some listeners, there are probably some people listening, right, who they really do want to do good for the world. They really do care about that. But they just don't think that they're going to take one of these AI focused jobs. And like maybe they think that because maybe they don't think that they're well suited to any kind of AI related roles. Or maybe they're not that inherently interested by this AI stuff. And if you're that person, I'm sorry that we've been talking so much about AI. Or I think alternatively, it might just be that they feel like they're not in a good position to change their careers right now. And if these things are going to happen very soon, that's kind of pointless. What do you say to these people? Is there anything specific in the book for them?
To step back one step further, the aim of the book is to give you these general purpose frameworks that anyone can use to figure out which career is best for them, no matter their view on causes. I also put my own best guesses in because I think it's interesting to show the application of the framework and people find it helpful. But that's actually a relatively small part of the material. So I think it should be very useful for people who aren't interested in AI. On the questions about how you can help, even if you don't feel that interested in AI right now, I think there's a few things to say about that. One is like, I think, historically it's easy to feel like, well, okay, AI means like the alignment challenge and we just need like technical researchers solving that challenge. And there's not that much else that other people can do. But I really want to think it's not just about AI misalignment. What we're facing more is something like the complete transformation of every aspect of society. It's like the Industrial Revolution, but happening 10 times faster, going to some place that we don't yet know. I do still think misalignment risks and AI loss of control risks are probably like the risk I would say is most important and neglected. But there's now a lot of other things. So something like concentration of power, that's a much more like social sciencey in a way, geopolitical element type cause, which needs a lot of non-technical people working on it. There's also still pandemic risks, engineered pandemic risks. And that actually mainly requires almost kind of like company building and engineering type skills. But, there's a lot we could do to really make the world a lot safer from pandemics, which would just be good in general, but also the risks could be accelerated if technological progress speeds up. And then I also in the book briefly talk about this range of emerging challenges, which are also super diverse from like the philosophical questions of like, what do we do about AI sentience and like legal questions around that, to even things like space governance, gradual disempowerment, which is again more of a social structure type challenge rather than a technical challenge. Yeah, I mean, I would also say even if you want to focus on global health, you should probably be thinking a lot about how you could use AI to help with that, or how AI might affect various aspects of it. So yeah, there's like a much broader range of issues. And then there's also a very broad range of roles these days. And yeah, I mean, more technical researchers would still be great, but we've done these surveys asking organizations we think are impactful, what are their biggest talent bottlenecks? And a lot of them are saying operations staff. So just like people to do management and HR and accounting and like finding offices and hiring people and all of the things you need to do to run an organization. And so anyone who's just worked in like business or pretty much any other fields might have those skills. Another huge bottleneck is the communications. So spreading the word about these problems, doing like PR and media for these different companies. There's a lot of, or even just being like an individual writer talking about these things. And then also just like huge need for people still in policy and government. And it's very possible to get into these types of roles in just a couple of months, even if you don't have an AI background already. I mean, one other big message of the book is people really think, well, I'm interested in these things, and so I need to find a career involving them, otherwise I won't be satisfied. But we've seen so many examples of people just trying anyway and then eventually finding it really interesting.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a very old school example, but in the book I tell Jess Whittleston's story, where she was a philosophy student at Oxford and was really interested in philosophy of mind. And she was like, well, like the thing I feel most interested in is just continuing as a philosopher, but I don't really see how we could have a big impact like that. And so she just like explored lots of other paths like policy and nonprofits. And she went into like evidence-based policy, the behavioral insights team. And then from that, she like pivoted into AI ethics and AI policy. And then she became eventually head of the AI policy team at CLTR, which is like the most important AI risk think tank in the UK. And Time named her one of the 100 most influential people in AI.
Whoa. Yeah, what a trajectory.
But she like finds it super interesting now.
Yeah.
Because she's learned the skills in this area and she sees that it's meaningful and like she sees why it's important and has interesting colleagues. And those are the things that make a career interesting, even if you might not start out already passionate about that topic.
Yeah, totally. There's a really wide range of jobs that are helpful for making AI go well that like don't necessarily require technical skills. Basically, any kind of dispositions or sets of skills that you currently have, there's plausibly some really useful way you could apply that towards something AI related. And it also seems like there are lots of jobs where your day-to-day wouldn't even necessarily need to be focusing that strongly on like the specific details that may not interest you about AI, but you could still be furthering efforts kind of indirectly in that way. I'm also hearing that if you give it a shot, you might actually love it, which is true, I think, of like lots of careers. I think I kind of want to talk to you now about your like personal trajectory here, because you know, you're an example of somebody who wasn't previously that focused on AI. So I know around 15 years ago or something, you were already like, AI risks were already very much like on your radar, but it wasn't your sort of the thing that you were thinking about every day is my understanding. And I'm kind of interested in what changed for you. Like, were there specific moments or was there any kind of like research or analysis that you did that made things just feel really visceral to you, that kind of changed your mind in some way?
I think it was either 2015 or 2016 where we had the combination of OpenAI being founded, like superintelligence was recently released, and then AlphaGo had just beaten Lee Sedol. And it kind of, that was like deep learning is working. And so at that point, if you extrapolate the trends, and we had like a mini call to action, like now is a good time to work on AI. I mean, I almost wish I'd followed that advice more myself, but people who did follow that advice at the time, now they're often like really high up in the key nonprofits or safety research teams or government working on these issues today. But yeah, at that point, I still thought building effective altruism would be more effective for me. It's a better match for my skills. And we were still very uncertain about AI, and like a big advantage of building a community interested in generally doing good is the possibility that they can switch which cause depending on which one turns out to be most pressing in the future, as well as you're getting a multiplier, you're getting more people involved. But then basically as AI timelines have shortened, I think the case for just working directly on AI gets stronger and stronger, rather than effective altruism is kind of like a one-step more indirect approach. So yeah, that's what I've been doing in my own career the last few years.
Yeah, were there any key moments or things that you learned that like really convinced you that AI risks were like the big thing for you to be working on?
It's just been really like thinking about the mechanics of AI scaling and coming to appreciate that just like every step in the process works. The AI companies, so Anthropic and OpenAI mostly, have increased their revenue about 5 times. And then that means that they can basically buy 5 times as many computer chips, or they can spend 5 times as much on computer chips. Historically, the efficiency of those chips has roughly doubled every 2 years. So roughly, they're then able to get the next generation of chips, and that means they get 10 times more computing power compared to before. And then recently, having 10 times more compute has basically meant they've earned 10 times as much revenue. But then if you now have 10 times more revenue, you can invest that back and now you can get another 10 times more computer chips. So it's actually like not only working, but it's potentially accelerating. And then I haven't even talked about AI R&D. There's actually additional feedback loops here, because if the AI model is also becoming better at doing AI research, then that that is also feeding back and accelerating the rate of improvement of AI on top of that.
Yeah.
And then also in addition, if you've made 5 times more revenue, you now have 5 times more money for salaries. So you get a bigger research workforce, which would also accelerate the progress more. And yeah, like we now have kind of like empirical estimates of all these different factors. Like we can see that roughly the AI research workforce has been increasing 30% a year or 40% per year, but algorithmic efficiency has been doubling each year. So that suggests that each time the amount of research going into AI is doubled, the algorithms improve much more than a doubling,
Right.
which is the thing that you need to start an algorithmic feedback loop. Like in the past, it was a much more theoretical thing where it's like, well, like if it could do AI research, maybe it could start a feedback loop. But you can actually like have a model and estimate the parameters empirically and show that it probably does.
So for people who are listening to this and maybe having a sort of similar wake-up experience where they're getting increasingly worried about AI risks and the chance that these things will play out quite soon, what should they do? What's your recommendation for what they should do now?
It really is possible to transition quite fast to working on these. It's not an easy thing to do. But we have seen lots of examples of people in a matter of months making quite dramatic career changes. And there's a kind of standard playbook that all these people use and can work. So there's a few steps. One is like doing a crash course to understand the field. So like what the big problems are, what the main views on timelines are, what some of the main interventions are, the main players. You want to be able to have a broad understanding of these things. And yeah, we have a reading list on 80,000 hours. I think it's called like the 11 central readings on AI. That's a good starting point. And then the most recommended thing is often one of the blue dot courses. And that just aims to give you that grounding. Then, you can think about which kind of broad way of contributing might work for you. Are you more of an operations, organization building type person, more of a comms, policy, technical researcher, or specialist? Like we need lots of lawyers, we need like even historians, economists, engineers doing biosecurity stuff. Identify a broad path and organizations that you might work at. And then just try and speak to as many people in the field as you can, especially at those organizations you're interested in, and say like, well, with someone of my skills, how might I help? Try and get more ideas like that. It's also really useful to ask, if in 3 months I wanted to be in the best possible position to get this job, what should I do next? And get those customized answers. And then it's just like a question of like applying to as many things as you can. Either just jobs straight away, or there's like more and more fellowships which aim to take you in, say, 3 months or a year, again, or sometimes some of them are 2 years, into like accelerating you in this field as much as possible. So it's really worth applying to all of those and seeing what you get. And then if you have any spare time, do a portfolio project of some kind. So do some type of real work that you can show people. And what that is depends on the field. Like, is it like building something with AI? Is it writing blog posts? It depends on what roles you're targeting. But that really helps stand out to employers and also learn a lot more about the field quickly. And then when you've done this, it's like a case of reassessing. And if you get a bunch of offers, then that's amazing. You can try and choose the best one for you out of those and just do that. And then that's like the quickest way to like get even more up to speed. And in 1 or 2 more years, hopefully you'll have even better opportunities and you can reassess at that point. If you don't get any offers, and I'm not like, I don't want to downplay it, many of these jobs are very competitive. There's a lot of applicants per place. So if you don't, then instead you can think, well, okay, what could I do in the next 1 or 2 years to learn a useful skill for helping with these issues? Mm. And there you could work in any field that will let you learn these skills. You can work in a startup, you can work in government, you can work in a different cause. There's lots of places that are great for learning these skills. And then the third thing would just be, okay, I'm going to just contribute from within my existing role without changing job. And there's also a lot of stuff that can be done there. I notice a lot of people, they're like, okay, I think AI is the most pressing cause. But when it comes to donating, they donate to Against Malaria Foundation.
Interesting.
I mean, I think even like our own host, Rob Wiblin, donated to the Shrimp Welfare Project.
How dare he?
Which is a very cool organization. But I do think like the returns to talent and funding can be different in different fields, but like it needs to be to quite an extreme degree to think that it's like optimal to donate to like one cause, but like work on a different one. If you think any of these AI related issues are the most pressing issues, you should also donate to them. And people get this idea that like money can't really do anything within AI, but that doesn't seem true to me. And so like as one example, and I don't think this is like the best donation opportunity by a long route, but it's kind of an example of one would just be, so Meta, the organization that has done the most useful work in the world about tracking how close we are to AI R&D automation, which is the most important, like maybe one of the most important questions in the world. I mean, their work is actually quite simple. Like there's so many ways they could make their time horizon project better and get us better measurements about these crucial things. And they were just saying like, well, we have like 30 amazing projects, but we only have the staff capacity to do 1 or 2 next quarter. And like this requires technical staff who could earn huge salaries working directly on capabilities. And they also need lots of compute to do these experiments. And so additional money it kind of means they can just hire better staff, have more compute, do more of these really useful benchmark results. And that just seems like it's a perfectly impactful thing to fund. Yeah, there's still, especially in these few years, there's a lot that can be done with money.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's much quicker to make a donation than to get a job. So
yeah, and I mean, I think like if you can change career, that will have an even bigger impact. But you can in a way, it's kind of amazing that it's possible for anyone to help with even this like very technical and like difficult question as AI. You really like, it's the old argument, you can via the invention of money, you can like transform your labor into someone else's labor.
It's an incredible thing. Have people heard about this?
Yeah. So that one is like, that's the money side. Though, I mean, I think maybe even more neglected is just thinking about spreading these ideas in society. Like it's a very weird situation in a way because it does feel like everyone is talking about AI all the time. But I feel like very few people have actually internalized what's happening. It's kind of like there's just like a lot of like frothy hype, but like not that much actual like, oh, like this is what's happening, I need to do something about this. So I think there's a lot that can be done by just helping people understand these ideas, correcting common misconceptions on X even, I think is actually quite useful and something that anyone can help with. And then the fourth one would be kind of politics, because I think we do eventually want to be able to, we want at some point there to be a strategic pause to AI. Like if we were facing an algorithmic feedback loop, I don't think we'd just want to let that run as fast as it possibly could run, which is the default that will happen now. If we could pause even for a year or two, that would be really helpful. And that's going to be difficult to have unless there's a lot of political will for such a thing to happen, because there's a good chance the companies won't just do it themselves. So we do also start to need to build political support for this being a big problem. And that's, again, something that anyone can help with.
Yeah. Okay. So it seems like there are lots of ways that you can help even very, very soon. So one thing is that you could actually get directly working on AI risks fairly quickly by taking some of the courses and things that you mentioned. But there are also sort of indirect ways that you can help very soon, including donating, trying to help build political will, and doing some communications work. So a really wide range of options, some of which can be done very, very quickly, and some of which might take you a few months or something like that. Does that sound right?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. We've talked a fair amount about what sort of jobs and areas people should be working on to have an impact on the world. I think a big reservation some of our listeners might have about taking on impactful jobs that will help make things go well. It might be sort of concerning what the future of employment actually looks like. And I know that you researched this when you were writing the book. So I'm curious to know what you make of predictions that AI is going to cause mass unemployment in the near term. So, for example, Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, has said that there's a chance there could be 10 to 20% unemployment in the next 5 years. And then Goldman Sachs has predicted that 300 million jobs could be at risk globally. If these kinds of predictions are right, then it seems like maybe a lot of the jobs you mentioned in the book might stop existing pretty soon. Do you think that their predictions are right?
I do think something like 10% unemployment could be quite likely, partly just because the pace of change will be so fast.
Right.
The length of tasks that AIs can do is increasing like maybe as much as 8 times per year. But like even many other benchmarks, you have these kind of rates of progress that are in the like 2, 4x, 8x per year kind of range. And that's actually like very counterintuitive because it means, suppose like in 1 year, AI can do 0.5% of a job. So it's like a few like minutes per week of help. So it's hardly noticeable. But then if that increases by 8-fold in 1 year, then like in year 2, that's now 4%, which is kind of like a noticeable help, but again, not like that big a deal. But then like in year 2, it's 32%, which is now becoming like, it's like a big thing that people are using all the time. And then suddenly like in year 4, it's like it can do pretty much everything. And so it could be this very rapidly unfolding where it's like, it seems quite slow. It's like hardly noticeable for a while and then just kind of like suddenly, and this is what happens with a lot of AI benchmarks where, you go from like 1% to 2% to 4%. But then like once you get further on, it's like, it kind of like suddenly saturates. The speed of progress could cause unemployment. And I just think also it means it's difficult to know from existing data because there's this pattern where like AI might be having a small effect and then suddenly much bigger. So the trends we see now in the employment figures things might suddenly go the other way. But yeah, with those caveats, I do think people are often, especially technologists, a bit too quick to assume there will be lots of unemployment due to AI.
Right. Okay.
The key way of seeing it is partial automation of a job often increases wages and employment for that job. Like an empirical example is people have been saying radiologists are going to be made unemployed for ages because AI can do image recognition really well, but actually radiologist employment is up. And I think average wages in the UK are like, in the US are something like 500,000 a year. So it's even still a super highly paid job. And there's, I think, actually a pretty straightforward explanation of this, which is only about a third of their time is spent analyzing images. And that means like all the other stuff they're doing is stuff that AI can't really do yet. It's like coordinating with other employees at the hospital and like talking to the patients about how to understand the results and like, oh, the machine is broken and we need to like figure out whether to trust these scans and stuff like that. And so even if the kind of like routine bit that AI can do becomes like much more efficient, it's only actually increasing their productivity by like 20 or 30%. And then, if you increase the productivity of a job by 20%, that might even mean you hire more of them. It depends on the job. But say like with a sales team, if each of your salespeople can just sell 50% more because they can like use AI to like find lots of leads and like help draft emails and now they're just like going a lot faster, like why wouldn't you just get 50% more revenue by, or even more? You might even be like, previously I had to pay this marketer 50K, but they would only bring in 30K of revenue, so it's no point doing it. But if then now they bring in 60K of revenue, then you might even hire more people.
Yeah, so I think here's what I'm not quite understanding properly with this. So if I'm an employer and my company has just become a lot more productive, I could either choose to spend the same amount of money on wages and hiring as I already was and like achieve a lot more with it. Or I could just cut back, spend a lot less, do a bunch of layoffs or something like that, and be achieving the same amount as I was before. And it seems like in both situations, I'm better off. So why wouldn't I just do the second thing and do a bunch of layoffs instead?
Well, so companies would be, in general, they'd be trying to maximize total profits.
Yeah.
And so if you can just get a lot more done, then you will make more revenue, which will mean you will make more profit. So that would generally be what people would try to do first. Though how it exactly shakes out depends on different industries and how much more of the thing people would want. With something like accounting, most people only need to they want to do their accounts once a year. So if they can use AI to do that for a tenth of the cost, roughly speaking, they will just spend a lot less on accounting and get the thing done. But most things aren't like that. Like if a luxury holiday became only 10% of the cost, I think many people would just take like a lot more holidays and they would do more of it. And so, yeah, like if you're a company making software and you can just produce more software and sell more of it and get more profits, that will often happen instead.
Mm-hmm. So it does seem like there are some reasons why when you've got partial automation making people more productive, in the kind of near term, jobs could be, wages could be increasing, or there could be more hiring, at least in some areas. But as AIs are able to automate more and more stuff, presumably at some point the balance starts shifting here, right? Like in previous waves of automation, at some point there has been some kind of decline in wages once there's a certain threshold met of automation, right?
That does seem to be a common pattern where partial automation causes rising or steady employment and wages. And then when you get to like really thoroughgoing automation, eventually employment does decrease.
Yeah, just to make this a bit more concrete, I think the classic example of this is ATMs, right? How did it look when it was ATMs?
When ATMs rolled out, there was lots of news stories about how bank tellers, like the people who count money in bank branches, would be made unemployed. And actually, it was true that the number of bank tellers needed to run a bank branch decreased by about half, which you might think would half employment. But what that actually meant was that now a much smaller number of employees could run a bank branch, which meant it was like much cheaper to run bank branches, which then meant they actually opened way more branches. And overall employment actually rose for another 20 years. And now the bank tellers they wouldn't spend their time counting money, they'd spend their time like talking to customers about their mortgage or troubleshooting stuff. But then after that 20-year period, we had smartphones and people started to just do online banking. Mm-hmm. And so they would like kind of totally bypass bank branches. Then since that point, employment has fallen a lot.
Yeah. So your view is that, correct me if I'm wrong, that at some point we'll kind of hit this point with AI as well, where we meet whatever threshold it is beyond which we begin to see employment going down or wages going down.
So for each job would hit at a different point depending on how easy it is for AI to do that job.
Yeah.
People can also move into new jobs.
Okay, yeah.
And what should generally be happening is, if AI is automating one job, that means like as a whole, the world is producing more stuff with less inputs. So that means we're getting richer. And that means that while, maybe the wages for the jobs that are being automated are going down, that extra wealth is then spent somewhere else. In particular, it's spent on the things that AI can't do yet, because those will become the remaining bottlenecks. And so wages for those other types of tasks should be going up. Mm-hmm. So that means people could switch from like all the other jobs should be seeing rising wages. And so as a software engineer, could you switch into some other area? And then we still won't see mass unemployment unless people, for some reason, aren't able to make that switch.
Right. On a job by job basis, we're seeing this trend of like wages potentially increasing or hiring potentially increasing, and then at some point that's sort of petering off and then there being a decline. And we're seeing this sort of complicated movement between jobs as well while that's happening, as people kind of jump ship and move to the thing where the curve is happening slightly later. Or zooming out, what does this pattern look like for like society as a whole, like when you zoom away from the individual jobs?
Yeah, so there is this really interesting idea that maybe what happened with ATMs happens for like humanity as a whole, where initially AI is making us more and more productive, and there's this kind of like massive employment boom and economic boom. Epoch AI has a macroeconomic of AI automation, and in their model, they imagine that an AI is created that can do 10% of tasks in 2026, which don't think we have yet, but maybe not that far off. And then they imagine, okay, suppose then that turned into an AI that could do 100% of economically important tasks. I think in 2030, maybe 2032 is when that's hit. So this is just like a hypothetical scenario. But they find that what happens is human wages increase tenfold and actually keep increasing even after full 100% AGI is created because it takes time to roll out. But then several years later than that, they like start to crash. So that would just be this. This happens in many economic models where you can have full automation. You get a rising then falling pattern of human wages. But there's another possibility, which is that maybe there's 1% of tasks where we either don't allow AIs to do them, or they can never like quite do them, or it's just like inherently important that a human does them. And if you put that into this model that only 99% automation is ever reached rather than 100%, then in that model, human wages just keep increasing indefinitely, and everyone is left working on that remaining 1% of tasks. So there's potentially this huge difference between actually 100% automation and 99% automation.
Yeah, I mean, it's baffling to me that 1 percentage point of automation can like make all the difference between like everyone's getting richer like indefinitely, and then like and the difference between that and just like mass unemployment, wages dropping to zero. How does that, I know you've just explained it, but like how, like, do you have any way to make it like more intuitive to listeners, like why that could happen?
Well, I don't know whether this will help, but it has kind of happened in history before, where in the past, almost everyone worked in agriculture, and now that's only a couple of percent of people. So in a sense, 99% jobs have already been automated. But that remaining 1% of things just expanded to become the whole economy. And even in places like South Korea, that transition happened in only one generation. So it can even happen very quickly.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, in terms of what these things will be, Alex Imes had this interesting article recently about, he called them relational jobs. So it's jobs where a human doing them is part of the reason why we want them. And so, for example, maybe a lot of luxury services or luxury crafts are kind of like this. And he observes that typically as we get wealthier, we actually buy more of these types of things rather than less. And you need to also picture, this is an economy where maybe there's 100 or 1,000 AIs per person. So like the idea that there could just be this like tiny little slither of like the still human things among this like vast economy, I think that makes it seem a bit less counterintuitive to me. Another is some of these things might essentially be oversight roles where you're like giving the AI preferences and instructions, because like each person is kind of like a mini CEO where there's like thousands of AIs and robots per person. And so that could almost be like a full-time job, is just like maybe instructing them or like checking what they're doing and like seeing that it's still like aligned with what we want. And then, yeah, things like art and like maybe nannies is another example people use where you really want a human to do it. I mean, to be clear, I actually think a lot of people won't bother with these jobs because in these scenarios, they would have so much like basic income, or their investments would be worth so much that they would just live off those. But it would mean like in principle, you could earn high wages if you wanted.
I think I'm struggling to see the vision. So I think what I'm struggling,
it's very controversial. Yeah. Like I think I really don't know which is more likely. I think it's also very likely that there's also a good chance that it's just literally like, no, like there's a finite amount of energy, and if you give it to the AI economy, it can just produce way more than if you have humans in the loop. And so just like basically all the important things become run by AI and robots, and human wages can drop like, relatively speaking, like an unlimited amount. There's no like real fundamental thing that would need to hold them up.
Yeah, I just feel like even if we're not in the sort of 100% automation scenario, and even if we do, stick around 99% automation or something like that, I think I see why wages overall could be going up because, production is increasing, everyone's more productive and stuff like that. In your vision, it sounds really lovely. Everyone's just like enjoying their luxury goods. But I'm kind of imagining a world where maybe there's like really vast inequality because like, you described like everybody, potentially loads and loads of people having their own sort of little army of AI workers and their own CEO. But like the thing that I'm imagining is that at least early on, you have like a small class of managers, people who are already in managerial positions, already at a point in their career or have a certain set of skills, who like can take over like a little, army of AI workers. they're the ones who are sort of capturing all the gains here, all the benefits, whereas everybody else kind of is screwed. Like, it's, this is what I'm imagining. Is that, like, why wouldn't that happen?
We need to be careful about different like parts of the timeline here, but I think in the short term, it does seem likely that many organizations become more top heavy, where they have less people doing like more routine white collar work and maybe less junior workers, but there's like a maybe slightly larger class of managers overseeing many AI agents. And so like the kind of managerial classes get higher wages. I mean, also grow because there could be more organizations. So probably that's an inequality increasing force. And this has also happened a lot in automation before. So like in finance, in investing, like some firms in the past, they'd have hundreds of those guys with like the jackets, like shouting on the trading floor. But now mostly those have been replaced by like 2 guys with like 10 screens.
You have to shout even louder to make up for it.
Yeah, so that's often one way that automation goes, is like smaller number of higher paid workers doing more. But then, well, sometimes automation has, if it makes a job easier, it can actually increase employment. So one example is with ride sharing. It used to, at least in London, it was actually really hard to become a taxi driver because you had to memorize the entire roadmap of London, and there was like a limited number of spots. And now it's a lot easier to just log into Uber, get your own car, and you can become a taxi driver. So that's decreased wages by about 20%, but 3 times more people work as drivers than in the past. And like, maybe you could have a thing where, say, for example, a job that would have needed a doctor before could now be done by a nurse with AI aid. And so you could actually see like nurse employment growing because now those workers can do things that like would have required 10 years experience before, but like the experience is contained within the AI instead. The third thing is like, the jobs that AI will be struggling to do the longest are things like service sector jobs and blue collar jobs and physical jobs. And so those ones will see potentially rising wages. And that's actually an inequality decreasing effect where that's like around 50 or 60% of people work in those sectors and they tend to be like below the median wage or around the median wage, and that could be going up. That's the transitory effect. If we look out longer, I do think AI most likely would increase inequality. And one reason for that is essentially it means labor is becoming less important relative to capital, because capital is what lets you buy all the robots and chips, and then whoever has the most robots and chips produces the most stuff, and so gets the most money. And wealth inequality is really extreme, much more extreme than income inequality.
Right.
So if wealth is becoming relatively more important, then it will be increasing inequality, unless, of course, there's taxation or something to counterbalance that.
Mechanism. Yeah. So I think I'm coming around to the idea that not necessarily everybody is unemployed, and also not necessarily in the immediate term there's this like massive inequality. But I think something else that's come up for me here is when you're talking about the jobs that do remain for people, I wonder if there is some tension here now between this and your other advice about what kind of work people should be doing to have the most positive impact on the world. So it seems like from an impact perspective, you have recommended a variety of things, but some large category of them are like being researchers and engineers who are trying to make AI safer for humanity. But then from the perspective of job security and making sure you still have a wage in the future, it's like, aren't those sorts of research and engineering jobs and things like exactly the kinds of things that get automated first? And instead, shouldn't people, if they kind of value themselves kind of selfishly, shouldn't they be becoming sort of blue collar workers and nurses that you've described and these kinds of things?
Yeah, so I think it comes down a lot to the time horizon that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And one of the big messages is just that it's hard to predict the effects, right? Because if we have this pattern of like increasing then decreasing importance, then, if you jump to, you don't want to like leave too early because you miss the like increasing phase when you're getting like even more. And like, we're definitely in that phase with AI engineers right now where, even if a bunch of AI research is automated. I mean, we're actually, let's say we're actually at a relatively low automation of AI R&D right now. But even if we get to a point where a lot more has been automated, that remaining bit is like really increasing in value, because that's the like thing that's the key bottleneck for AI progress. And like we're kind of seeing this with engineering roles now. It's like it's partly like, well, you get your agents to do loads of stuff and then you review their work. But people are actually saying that they like feel busier than before, because essentially like every individual engineer is turned into a manager of 10 AI agents. People are saying, well, what's bottlenecking us is just like code review, because like so much code being produced and we like can't review it quickly enough and vet it enough. And so, but if you have that skill, then that skill's become like even more valuable than before. All these things that are involved like deeply in the AI economy probably increase in value a lot until you're basically like at full AGI. I think probably if you're trying to maximize your impact or even just your wages in the immediate term, you probably want to like go on those rising things, really crucially important things for a while. And then later you could switch to one of these relational jobs. But like there is a bit of difference in this, the social impact perspective versus the personal perspective, because like from a social impact perspective, you mostly just care about this transition and helping that go well. And then if we make it through AGI, then
we'll worry about it later.
Well, then we can chill, hopefully, because we've like done our part in history.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure even from a personal point of view, it's that important to think like, okay, what could I do that would like, will still not be automated even in 40 years time? Because if there's been an AI X risk, then that won't happen. So you don't need to worry about it. And then if there hasn't been,
don't worry, you'll be dead. If
there hasn't been, probably we will be in like some type of like society of that's like 100 times or 1,000 times richer than today. And your material needs will be taken care of.
Assuming someone sorted out the inequality thing, which is...
Well, even if like there is increasing inequality, like imagine if the world was 100 times wealthier, but the billionaires get 1,000 times wealthier. So they're now like trillionaires. But like an ordinary person is still 100 times richer. Like like it has to be pretty bad for people to be, say, like actually worse off than now. Like you'd have to have inequality increase hugely and there to be like no redistribution at all.
Yeah, okay. We've talked quite a lot about what kinds of jobs might be automated and what the dynamics of that looks like. But my understanding is that in the book, that's not the only component people should be interested in when it comes to what jobs or what skills are likely to be valuable in the future, right?
I like to focus on skills because jobs are kind of like involve many different skills. So that's like adds an extra layer of complexity.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've touched on many of the factors already. So the skills that will most increase in value due to AI would be things that are hard to automate. So like hard to get the last bit done. Secondly, are complementary to AI. So I use the example of AI engineers. If you're still like doing the things that are the key remaining bottlenecks, those increase in value as AI gets more useful, the value of making AI 1% more efficient again actually increases in value because like more is being done with AI. The third one is that we could use far more of the outputs, which was the elasticity point we talked about before. So like accountants, it's less obvious because maybe like a more fixed amount of it we need, whereas say like healthcare or luxury travel or software are things that society could use way more of. And then the fourth one is that it's hard for other people to learn the skills. So in the book, I talk about the example of being a waiter at a high-end restaurant is actually like pretty hard for AI to automate. It's a thing where we might really want a person to do it for the human touch, but it's like relatively easy for other people to switch into that job from other things, which could mean wages would probably still like rise in line with the rest of the economy, but might not rise faster. It might not be one of the most valuable skills. On the other hand, say like people like electricians who work on data centers in Virginia, they've already seen big increases in wages because that's a skill set that's like harder, takes longer for other people to retrain, and there's just like a shortage of them now. Yeah, those would be the 4 key things to look for in which skills will increase in value. Yeah, and then I would say you don't want to just look at what will increase in value. You also want to look at what's valuable now. And so start as that as your base point, and then kind of like imagine some will go up and some will go down. So this is one reason why I think it doesn't make that much sense to say, oh, you're like a college student who could do consulting, but you should become a plumber instead, because like the differential of those white collar jobs and plumber are still quite large now. So even if white collar jobs come down in wages and plumbers go up a bit in wages, it might be quite a long time before they actually cross.
Right.
So instead, that person should probably be looking at a white collar job, but it's like one of these parts that's harder for AI to do. So maybe it's like more social skills heavy, or like it's a more messy thing, or it's like a management job, management skills. And that's probably where that type of person should be focusing first. If you were like very on the fence, you're like, well, I'm not sure I should go to college or I could learn a trade. And you're like, it's like a very borderline case for you. Then yeah, I think compared to the past, there's a stronger argument for doing the physical or the complex physical skills, which will take a bit longer to automate. Though, of course, eventually there will be robotics. So it's not, all of these things are just about some time frame. I talk about like riding the wave of the things that are most valuable at the time.
Yeah.
Rather than, again, trying to just like come to some permanent solution.
Yeah, so a big part of this is going to have to be flexibility, right? With like, this is what you do for now, but like, I guess people need to kind of stay on the pulse of what's happening and like work out when to pivot.
Yes.
Yeah, which is kind of tough.
And that's like a meta skill that's, if pace of change increases, then the skill of like learning quickly and changing path, and like the kind of like psychological resilience to do that, those things become more valuable.
So I think one pessimistic response I might have as a listener at this point is like, if I do think that there's a good chance of very advanced AI systems coming very soon, and that causing the world to change really quickly and posing loads of really severe existential scale threats, as well as coming with a chance that at some point loads of people might end up being unemployed. I know that you've sort of offered some reasons for hope here, but I think that if I could listen to this and be like, man, if all of this is about to happen very soon, and I don't feel super confident that people are going to be able to put the right mitigations in place in time, I might just think, maybe the best way for me to spend my time now is just by doing the things that I enjoy, like before my livelihood gets taken away from me, or before everyone dies or some other really horrible thing happens. What do you say to those people?
Even in many of the like good scenarios, the world could still end up kind of like totally alien to us. And there's like something very sad about that. And yeah, I think people whose reaction to AI is just like pure excitement, that feels like very off base to me. It is a scary thing we're facing. It's not that helpful to kind of like dwell in the fear, but like that's not to deny that it isn't scary. This is a insane thing to be happening, and we might not be able to handle it. But then like moving from that into, okay, so what can I actually do? Ultimately, it's about focusing on the things you can change and accepting the things you can't. Although it's like in some ways overwhelming situation to be in. And I think actually will get more overwhelming because the pace of change will just increase. Like I can sometimes feel some even like gratitude for like, isn't it amazing that I get to play like any part in this at all? One of the most important things to happen in history. Like, how is it that we're here at this moment and like might be able to do anything about it? It's a feeling like gratitude or like almost like amazement at this situation.
I think it's very easy to fall into these pessimistic styles of thinking. But I think that one thing that really does help with that is remembering, all of the stuff that we've talked about so far about the things that people can actually do to help. Like, yes, this might be a really critical time in history, but it's sort of like a critical opportunity that people can take. There's tons of work still to be done. And as we've said, there are ways that people can like pretty quickly shift into roles or start indirectly helping in a way that could like actually set the future on a more positive path. And I find that encouraging and motivating.
I think I find for myself, just even on a selfish level, I feel a bit less stressed if I feel like I'm doing my part.
Yeah.
Like I've figured out what I can do and I'm doing my best.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee this will go well, but there is a lot that can be done at the margin to make it significantly more likely. We've touched on a lot of resources in this conversation, but one I want to highlight is we just released on the 80,000 Hours Substack by Matt Beard, an article on how to transition into working on these risks in just 3 months. And it's like a step-by-step process you can work through with a lot of links detailing each step. And then, yeah, I'd strongly to encourage you to consider applying to, if you're interested in transitioning to 80,000 Hours one-on-one advising, and they can see if they can help you. And then the third thing is you could try and build any of these skill sets we've been talking about that could help you work on these issues, whether that's organization building, some type of communications, government and policy, more relevant technical skills, any of those things that put you in a good position to help.
And more broadly, there is also your book that's now come out. Yeah, do you want to say anything about what you hope it will do?
In a way, it feels like my life's work. It's the last 15 years of thinking about this question at 80,000 Hours, and I've tried to distill all of our most central and important ideas into this one nicely honed package. So yeah, I'd be really honored if anyone wanted to buy it and check it out. What would be amazing for this book is if it just becomes like one of these key things that if someone doesn't know what to do with their life, it's like a standard thing people recommend and it becomes like a standard careers book. Maybe could let 80,000 Hours reach a much bigger audience and help a lot more people work on these issues. So if also you know anyone who's just feeling confused about what to do with their life, then you could consider getting it for them. And it's released this week. So any orders this week can help us make the bestseller lists, which would also help us reach a lot more people. So really grateful for any help.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been great.